Hey guys, in this video we're going to be talking about the Postel's law. The Postel's law, compared to some of the previous laws, isn't really that complicated. It's not going to be too long, but it definitely is a really crucial law that we all must consider when building accessible and usable products. So what does the Postel law state? Well, it states that we have to be liberal in what we accept and conservative in what we send. And basically what that means is that when we're actually designing, for example, let's say products, and as product designers, we should design products that are accessible to most users. And we should also allow them to enter or give feedback to us or interact with us in different ways without necessarily restricting those ways. So some of the takeaways from this law are: be empathetic to, flexible about, and tolerant of any of the various actions the user could take on any input they provide. The second one, anticipate virtually anything in terms of input, access, and capability while providing a reliable and accessible interface. The third one, the more we can anticipate and plan for in design, the more resilient the design will be, obviously. And the fourth one, accept variable input from users, translating that input to meet your requirements, defining boundaries for inputs, and providing clear feedback to the user. So a few things about this particular law is, let's say when you're actually working with this law, like, you have to consider what the origin is, right? So the origin for this particular law was by John Postel, and it was with regards to TCP and networks. And what the law basically said was, it was about creating programs that send messages following a strict set pattern. So obviously the pattern should be considerate. It should be, again, very specific, so other applications don't really have a problem accepting any of the messages that we're sending them. And then we should also create programs that can still have the flexibility to accept different types of inputs when they're receiving those messages. So for products, we have to design products that can be accessible by most and expect different types of responses from users. Now, there are different ways in which, this can manifest when you're actually designing stuff. One of them is, or a few of them are, like, obviously making the product accessible. So we should consider for different types of impairments, like vision impairments, sound impairments, so on and so forth. We should obviously allow users to interact with the product, not only just using the mouse, which is obviously very basic, but also have keyboard interaction. So making your buttons focusable and allow users to navigate to different sections by using shortcut keys, so on and so forth. We should also optimize for assistive technologies. That means obviously we should have area labels. We should make the design compatible with screen readers, like maybe JAWS or something, and stuff along those lines. And then obviously the design should also be responsive on different devices, so people accessing it from, let's say, their cell phones, their tablets, or their desktop devices can easily access them, and the experience isn't necessarily degraded in any of those. Another thing that we have to care about is we have to be generous when accepting feedback. So obviously we have to avoid bringing up errors if that error can be avoided. So as an example, if we on, let's say, a particular input field accept a specific value, right? Whether it's your national identity number, or whether it's your credit card, so on and so forth. Like, sometimes people may actually give dashes in between those. So it's fairly easy from a development point of view to actually omit the dashes. But sometimes what applications do is they don't really omit the dashes and they force the user to do them. So, which isn't necessarily, like, those are errors that can be avoided. Similarly, we can accept data in various formats. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a one particular manner. And then we also have to be considerate of the various input mechanisms. Like, obviously people interact with the mouse, but they can also send us data using gestures. They can also send us data using voice and stuff along those lines. So if we can be considerate when accepting feedback, that would be great as well. Another thing that we can do is with forms, right? So with forms, we can only ask for what's absolutely necessary and have ways to decode the information. So in one example here, we have a form that can be bad if you're asking the user for a lot of information. And by doing that, obviously we're putting cognitive load on the user, and then his ability to actually go through the whole form is deteriorated because we're asking him too much. So just ask for what's necessary and move forward. The other thing that we can do is we can work with progressive enhancement. And what progressive enhancement, and if people haven't heard that term, that basically means responsive design, but a design that actually starts from the mobile device and then goes up on larger devices. So previously, or like even right now, a lot of people actually do graceful degradation. And what graceful degradation does in terms of responsive design is that they usually build for a wider screen, maybe a desktop screen, and then try to narrow it down to, let's say, tablets and then mobile devices. So the problem with that particularly is that if you're actually optimizing, or you're spending most of your time working on the desktop device, because that's honestly what usually happens. The first thing that you actually do gets most of your attention, and then in my opinion, the effort actually is cut down slightly. So if you optimize for desktop devices, you're not really going to optimize for mobile devices, and mobile devices have limited features. You also have to consider about, like, let's say, specific browser features that aren't really available on mobile. So mobile devices also have a limited memory, so you have to consider how heavy the website is in terms of, obviously, the memory it occupies. You also have to consider the internet speed of the user, so you have to optimize images as well, and you have to focus on universal access. So if you actually go with progressive enhancement and you focus on the mobile devices first, because that's going to be the lowest common denominator, and even in mobile devices, you can think about devices that may be popular but don't really have a lot of, let's say, flexibility in terms of, let's say, some of the features that are available. So if you do that, and if you optimize, let's say, for 3G, I'm not saying you have to optimize for a really low bandwidth thing, but you can optimize for 3G. And if you're optimizing for that, you're making your images really small and then optimized, and then you're also checking speed tests, so on and so forth, and then more focused on that. And then afterwards on the larger experiences, that's going to provide a more universal experience, and it's hopefully going to open your application to a lot of different users. Similarly, and this probably is the last thing that I want to point out, is when we're actually creating design systems, right? What we can do with our design systems is we definitely have to be liberal in terms of the feedback we're getting from the design side, from the content side, from the code side, or from developers, like the variants that we need to create based on the props that they probably have on the back end or on the front end side of things. And we also have to focus on the business strategy and the goals of the business, so on and so forth. So we can be very liberal when accepting all of that feedback. Accepting all of that is definitely going to be part of the process, but we have to be conservative in the output, and we have to be consistent. We have to componentize things. We have to make sure that the components we're creating are absolutely necessary, and the patterns that we define are consistent and are something that can be representative throughout the design system. So those are things that we need to think about. As an example, if I were to give an example just quickly, there can be, for example, a lot of different sizes that we can create, or a lot of different styles that we can create for buttons, right? So maybe we can have 5 styles, but are those 5 styles absolutely necessary? Well, maybe in the product we actually are using 5 styles, but we have to, as designers, go back and think whether 5 different styles of buttons, or let's say 5 different sizes of buttons, are necessary, or can we actually reduce those buttons down to reduce the complexity of the components that we're creating, so on and so forth. And then we have to make sure that our components, our design system is accessible. It's based on certain principles of accessibility. It meets the contrast requirements, so on and so forth. But yeah, you have to basically have a larger principle, and then you have to be conservative in how you follow that particular principle across your components, rather than deviating unnecessarily without necessarily for a larger benefit to the design system in general. So that's pretty much going to be most of what I'm going to talk about with regards to Postel's law. Definitely let me know if you have any other questions, concerns about this law. And that's going to be it for this video. Do subscribe, do hit the bell icon. I'll see you later. Take care.